very interesting that you talked about camouflaging and the impact of camouflaging leading to mental health difficulties, because we've now got Helen Ross, who's going to be talking to us about mental health difficulties and breaking down barriers in mental health. And as I said earlier, and Helen is also going red for dyslexia, thank you. And Helen is one of the trustees of the British Dyslexia Association, and along with Aaron. So welcome, Helen. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. I was listening along to what Sarah was saying, and it was so like amazingly clever and intellectual and beautifully put together. And there was I feel like I'm kind of coming in on the back foot, and it's all my own silly fault with this. Hi everybody, it's lovely to see you, well, to be with you today. I can't see you, but that is what it is. I'm talking about breaking down barriers in mental health, and my focus is very much with dyslexia. I haven't written a PowerPoint, and I deliberately didn't write a PowerPoint because I think for me, I need the capacity to be able to kind of think a little bit around what I'm saying. Obviously, I've got notes and whatnot, but it's going to be a much more personal talk for the next half hour or 25 minutes, half hour or so, because it's about my journey and drawing on my professional knowledge and my own experiences of dyslexia and mental health. I think the first thing I really wanted to do is kind of, I've noted to myself that I'm going to set my scene. Because in this particular context, it is entirely salient. There are times where it's not relevant at all. But the thing that's kind of over the last few months, I've ended up talking quite a lot around mental health and sharing my journey and sharing kind of abstractified journeys of young people I've worked with as well. I've got dyslexia. The whole internet knows it. And if the internet doesn't know it, then Google it. And it's written there. And I'm very, very open about having dyslexia. Historically, I've been very, very open about the fact that I was sort of late to the party. I was 17 when I got diagnosed, so it was A-level maths, literally crying in the classroom because I couldn't read the questions. It was the mechanics bit of A-level maths. So I did maths, physics and German A-level, and mechanics is the sort of physics flavour of maths. So you have to read all the questions, kind of unpick it all and go, work out what's going on. And then normally you draw like a little thing called a free body diagram, which is where all the forces are acting, and it's a literal picture of what was happening. Now you give me the picture, okay, no, if you gave me, 20 years ago, the picture, I was good to go and I could absolutely do the question. Or if I saw, because I did engineering at university, if I saw what was happening, dead easy. If you make me read it, well, it made me die inside and I literally cried. It was awful. So around that, like the mental health, I think the mental health impact of my dyslexia has been really quite substantial, because there are quite a few letters after my name. I'm a lucky soul, so I'm clearly not daft, but I've always felt not enough. I've said it before. I think Donna may have heard me say it at one point. This kind of, Donna Stevenson, who's on the call as well, there's the kind of baggage, as it were, of just not feeling enough, and it's quite annoying. It's exhausting. And poor Mr. Dr. Ross, my kind patient husband, still deals with this with me having moments of wobble. And again, I don't hide the fact that I have these moments, because not everybody's as confident and as gobby as me, and not everyone's as confident sharing stuff. I'd rather share stuff and be the person that's a punch bag, because I'll punch back, as it were, metaphorically. Not everybody else has that capacity. So that's kind of setting my scene. I will also say, and I think Sarah touched on it as well, the kind of language I will use around dyslexia. There's the people first or the disability first thing. So it's dyslexic person or person with dyslexia. I sit on the fence, as in I just say I'm dyslexic or I have dyslexia. I use both for myself. I tend to kind of model what other people do when I'm discussing with them. I'm not fussed from a personal level, so I will switch between. I do realise other people have a preference, but it's like Marmite, it seems, for some people. So I'm not aiming to please either sort of camp. I'm just going to talk as best I can, and it will fall out my mouth how it falls out my mouth, because that's just how I talk about dyslexia from my own perspective. I think one of the things that really strikes me around mental health in general, and how it's addressed in kind of wider society, is there a huge structural barriers. From a kind of geeky research point of view, I am very much a biosocial model of disability and impairment and things around that. So with dyslexia, I do think there is something going on in the mind, brain, neurologically, that's the word. So neurologically, that makes things difficult. The different theories of dyslexia, what causes it, where it spans from, not immaterial, far from it, but that's not my focus. I'm a pragmatic practitioner. I am not a psychologist. I'm a sociologist when I do kind of my research stuff, and it does actually, there is a huge difference, I think, in how I look at dyslexia and its impact because of that. And for me, so there is an internal kind of wobble, very technical word, that makes things hard in your phonological processing, your verbal memory, and all the rest of it. The cause of that, I don't know. I'm quite happy to say I don't know, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a sociologist. I look at interaction. I look at what happens when I, as a dyslexic individual, go out into the world and I'm bombarded with the written word. It's that interaction between the external structures that hit me in the face, that get me from across the board, particularly if I'm a young person in education, and that make me feel not enough. A lot of my work has focused on that over the years. There's a few kind of ideas cooking in my brain now for how to look further with that. But I think for me, it's the real root of my own mental health wobbles is perceived failure. And I perceive myself as I never read a book until I was 18, like not voluntarily. I read on holiday after my A-levels, I read one of those little books that was a freebie with a girly magazine. So it was kind of the grown-up equivalent of a colouring book or a dot-to-dot book. I still do like a colouring book. And I remember talking to my English teacher at school, and he was like, he's a really nice man, we're still in touch, he's lovely. But I was like, Mr. O, I didn't really do any reading around GCSEs. I didn't read my Shakespeare play. I didn't. I can't tell you what happens in King Lear. I don't know. We did Frankenstein. I don't really remember. I didn't really read it. I listened to my teacher and I wrote down carefully and considered what I was told about the books, and may have watched some films. But I didn't read. But I was always comparing myself to the people that did. And there's this concept of being well read, which is steeped in classism. It's steeped in a huge amount of institutional snobbery that filters its way down into the classroom, that you have to be able to read. You have to love reading. You can't just be able to do it. You have to love it. I hate it, for the record. Hate it. I do it because I have to, and it's important for my work. I do not enjoy it. And all of these little discourses, these messages hit young people. And I hope as a teacher, when I was in the classroom, I didn't contribute to this. I probably will have done, and it troubles me. But I've always been very open around my difficulties with reading. But it's the discourses of what you should be able to do. You should love reading. You should do this and you should do that. And that feed into this kind of little mini microaggressions that young people in school are bombarded with every day. And that leads them to think they're failures, that they're not enough. That, well, I can't read, I must be stupid. And because so many structures in education hang on literacy, and it hangs on the children must be able to do it all themselves. God forbid they use technology. God forbid that they make a video recording rather than, a written essay to show their understanding of something. So there are these structures externally that are just hitting people and squishing them, really, really squishing them. And I think to say I was a victim of that, is it melodramatic? I don't know. I honestly don't know from my own perspective. For other people, I'd say it is. It's not melodramatic, it's the case. So, you're constantly failing by educational standards, and pen licenses, and one of the things that really strikes me with the kind of new, it's not new now, but the not national curriculum level ways of tracking students. And we did it in my last school, and my last school was a lovely school, is a lovely school to work in. There's this notion of, in primary schools, working towards standard, or in secondary it might be you're emerging your knowledge or you're developing. If you're a child who struggles to access literacy, you will struggle to access the curriculum unless there are substantial changes made. And you're not going to see changes in progress, because if you're always emerging in that year's curriculum knowledge or input, you're not going to see progress. Whereas at least with national curriculum levels, you might go kind of, 2C, 2B, 2A, 3, 4, you saw progress. So I think, again, that's something that really troubles me, that measuring progress doesn't look like progress to young people, quite potentially, and it may not look like progress to their families too. So this notion of I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, follows you, it haunts you. It's like, I said to somebody the other day, it's like a woodpecker kind of knocking on your head and just wearing you down, absolutely wearing you down. And I had it, and my parents are so supportive. My family, I'm from Royal Leamington Spa, darlings. I grew up in a lovely house, a lovely setting. I'm very, very lucky. My parents go Team Newton, and my school is again still a very good school. So I didn't have some of the structural battles that other people currently do, but it wore me down, and I've had anxiety-based wobbles, and I'm not enough, and that follows me, and I don't want other people to have that. And I think for me, I've got 4 bullet points noted. The kind of title of my next bit is around these structural elements leading to perceived failure. Now, what I see in primary schools that just makes children climb up the walls is, and I understand why teachers do this. This is not me denigrating teachers, far from it. It's a wider question. Comparison, standardized data. There's PIRA, Puma, the NGR, bajillions of different standardized reading tests. I get why we do them. I use standardized tests. They are really important for understanding where a child sits relative to others and relative to themselves. But it needs to be softly done. It needs to be gentle. It needs not to kind of say you're a failure. So it's a constant comparison. And I would conjecture that by continually measuring the metric, are you changing it, or could one spend the time spent measuring reading, measuring writing progress? Well, that's a couple of hours every term. If we had a couple of hours every term or half term doing it, or looking at ways around doing it, could that be better spent? And something that I've been the deliverer of these, I've supported young people, but it's out of class interventions. They have a place. I absolutely agree, they have a place. And I was very, very lucky in my last school that I had some awesome kids for small group settings. And actually, the sense of solidarity and kind of almost like a support group that we fostered in these sessions was really, I think I'm going to kind of not hedge my bets and say I think it was really good for the children, because they got to meet each other, share with each other, like, oh, I'm having a mare in this lesson, or have you tried this? And it was as much me teaching them the actual content of the literacy program. It was also them sharing their own good practice. So the positives of that are great. It can be helpful for mental health. But if children are constantly taken out of classroom settings, or constantly missing form time, or missing PE, the kind of stuff that they might love or need to kind of get out of the system, well, the knock-on effect for their mental health is going to be horrible, and they're going to stand out because they're going to have to stand up and walk out the room. The TA or the teacher who's working with them will go and get them, will sit next to them. There's an identity that they're having foisted upon them, which may not be helpful in that moment, and it takes the onus, the control away from young people as to what's shared with whom, when, how they control their own narrative, their own projections of what they are, who they are, that can absolutely destroy them. It can be exhausting. And I think I think for me, and I'm literally in the process of writing a course during today around dyslexia-friendly classrooms, dyslexia-friendly practice, which is generally good for most students. Are there tweaks we can make in the classroom? Is there tech we can use? Is there affordable, accessible ways of doing interventions without spotlighting that it's just the dyslexic kids that go, or just the kids that find this tricky that go? Could we, in a school I worked at years ago, everybody had personalised learning sessions. Now, it was a private school, so I understand the difference with that, but actually it was really good for the brighter kids who didn't want to stand out as being different. Something to think about, because it's that pointing things out, it's the discourse of you're failing, it's the look at you over there in the corner, you're doing your thing. It can have such an impact. So I think for me, kind of removing structural elements that make things hard involves really considering how are we framing them, how are we implementing them. Now, these are questions that will be different in every setting, but it matters to think about it, I would say, because knock-on effects are huge. In therapy, in medication, potentially in underemployment, in underachievement, there will be huge costs and emotional costs across the board if young people are not supported properly, so that their mental health doesn't tank in schools, because they're utterly bombarded by the written word. And it's quick, boom, boom, boom. You haven't got time to think, you haven't got time to process. And I say this as the student that was like, Mr. Mayor, I haven't copied off the board in A-level physics. I was that student. I am a gob on legs. I was happy to say it. Well, no, I said it. There was a cost to me, but not everybody has that. So again, it's about thinking how things are delivered so that young people don't have to be the one to stick their head above the parapet and have that cost on their mental health. And teachers, as professionals, as parents, there are a lot of things that can be done, and it's so much of it is around time. If you give people time to absorb stuff, time to control their own narrative, time to process and make sense of things, they're not screwing up their face in a confused way, which I do all the time. I've sat with Aaron in meetings and he's probably seen my face, and it's not always the most, I spend a lot of time confused. But I've kind of made peace with myself. If you're in school, you're going to spend time feeling confused, which leads to you then worrying and anxiety, and kind of, there's a vicious cycle around your emotional tumble downwards. What's the word? A vicious circle, yeah, which can be really, really tiring and terribly unhealthy. And I think for me, little tweaks can have a huge effect. The pen license does my head in. I'm a secondary teacher by trade, so I've never had that sort of battle. And when I was at school, I remember the day I got my pen license. I was, I think, third in the class, because actually at the time, if I wrote slowly, it was almost legible. But I was like third in the class. There were people that didn't get their license on that day, but you didn't have reboutable pens. The notion that you have to have a pen license because you'll make a mess with a pen, but you can rub pen out. Now, there's those fancy ones with the little rubber end. It's not the same. We're not in the same world that we were, I'm 41, so 30 years ago. And if you don't get your pen license, you feel about 2 inches tall. That's pretty depressing. That's pretty soul destroying for a young person. And that doesn't leave you. Like it doesn't leave me when I got my pen license. If you don't, it's going to be pretty meaty as a feeling left with people. And time, if somebody's reading, if somebody's wobbling with their spelling or their writing, give people time. And I realise I really do realise how packed the curriculum is. And that's an argument I'm aiming to have in due course over the next few years. I've got a little plan. But wherever you can, for parents, for teachers, anybody engaging with young people, give them time. Give them that in 2 minutes we're going to do this. Give them like a little now and next list, just so they know what to expect. And I think quite often, and my brother has autism, so I'm used to kind of living with that, as it were. A lot of the stuff that mum and dad did when we were younger, and that I've done in the classroom to support kids with dyslexia and autism, is a now and next idea. Is knowing where you are on the kind of list of events for the session. Where are we? What do I need to do to get to the next bit? Because that gives you structure. It means you don't have to remember what you're doing, which takes a huge burden off your brain, and you can kind of allow yourself time. And wherever you can, don't make people read and write. Certainly don't make people read and write there and then on the spot, because the anxiety, the underriding feeling that I used to, and I do get now, if somebody asks me to read in public, my shoulders go up, my whole body tenses, and I am 41, confident, articulate, and allegedly not totally daft. A young person in a classroom hasn't got those years of confidence and those years of academic success, and they might not go on to have kind of academic success. They may have different flavors of success, which is really important. But give people time. Plan in wriggle room, plan in time to learn how to plan. And I think we really need to look at kind of in the classroom how we start to flex our muscles and move things on, so that not everything is written, or so that tech is more accessible. But I think for me, it's about not standing out, because everyone learns differently anyway, and I'm not belittling the challenges that we as dyslexic people have, far from it. But if everyone's a bit different and has their own quirky little way of doing stuff, and I say quirky not to be disrespectful, but like, I'm mad as a box of frogs, you know, I can't sit still. I fidgeted something rotten under my desk where you guys can't see. Everyone has a different way of doing things. But at school, I did kind of try and keep it all in, and I biked everywhere, which kind of got out a whole lot of my grump and anger. But if we can really start to embed not bombarding people with stuff that literally makes them cry, if you're me, and giving them time to deal with things that are challenging for them, then actually we're kind of heading off the bigger mental worries and the bigger mental health issues out the path, because we're dealing with the small things, so that there isn't a whole lot of small things that mount up, and then it's like a game of buckaroo. You put something else onto that individual and it just blows up. And I think the little things we can do in classrooms, like using tech where you can, giving everybody a different coloured handout, or you know, a buff coloured handout rather than just the dyslexic student, or printing out resources for everybody rather than just the dyslexic student, trying to minimise copying off the board. Or if you're in the workplace, don't expect people to read an email on the spot. Send it them in advance. Don't expect people to necessarily be able to give you a well thought through answer on the spot. And that's children and adults if you're in a workplace as well. Give people time, give people control of their own narrative, and give people a sense of ownership of their identity, and don't foist things upon them. Because I think having ownership of yourself, your identity in whatever setting you are, is incredibly empowering. And I know it's 2022, so 5 years ago now, I did my PhD, which is quite depressing when I think about it. But in my PhD work and every single piece of research I've done subsequently, it's all around identity, you know, with climate change, dyslexia stuff, more SEN in general. The sense of well-being in yourself and not feeling wobbly, not anxiety-based, but feeling kind of at ease, comes from empowerment, and it comes from a supportive surrounding, which then immediately feeds back into a young person feeling better about themselves. So if we can make structural changes, young people are going to have a positive interaction with school, with their teachers. They're not going to be battling. They're not going to have an underlying feeling of anxiety, which then sort of stemming from the wobbly interactions with their surroundings. If you then don't have a sense of anxiety around your dyslexia and around yourself, you can start to go, oh, there are positive elements to my dyslexia, which then inform positive interactions with your teachers at the kind of the meso level. And then at a macro level, as an individual with dyslexia, your interactions with those wider structures and institutions become more positive, which then feeds back. And it is sort of a multifaceted thing around building up positive narratives, building up a positive sense of well-being, or not. And I think little changes in the classroom at that sort of at meso level, so kind of between the big ends, the big structures, and the individual internally, can feed in and help a young person feel better as they feel empowered. You might end up, a gob on legs like me who argues with everybody, or you might just be able to feel confident in yourself and say what you need to your teacher, or talk to your family about what you need. And I think for me, that really is key. Positive messages surrounded by structures that are supportive. Now, some of the questions some of the discussion I was aware of in the last session with Sarah was, peer groups, social support groups. I don't think it's a bad thing at all if that's what young people want, if that's what people want. Many years ago, when I was first moved down to Bath, I joined a dyslexic adults group. It was good for me. It suited me at the time. They still are lovely people. But it's about creating a space where it's okay not to be okay. And it's kind of a cheesy phrase and a little bit stereotypical, but stereotypes often have a basis in reality. And for me, having space to go, I'm dyslexic and it's doing my head in, was really important, because it gets things out and it means I could talk about it. I had adults at that point. I had peers that were adults, and they were, oh my goodness, so accomplished. And it was actually at a time where, when we first moved down to Bath, I was quite vulnerable and quite wobbly with teaching. So I wasn't in a great place, having had a kind of wobbly experience with teaching initially, and I was feeling a bit thick and a bit like, oh my goodness, I'm going to do a PhD. Oh, what am I doing? So having space to go, dyslexia sometimes sucks. I sometimes really struggle with my mental health because dyslexia can be exhausting. Gave me space to actually then go, oh, but there are some positives. And I was sort of empowered and able to really start engaging a lot with, at the time, Bath Uni, to work out what we were going to do as a team around me to get me through my PhD. Supervisors, amazing people. I didn't have that at school until halfway through year 12. Not that my teachers weren't good, but we just didn't know what was going on. So as soon as we worked out what was going on, I had that in school, and it had a massive difference. So for me, to break barriers around mental health and to hopefully head some of the wobbles off at the pass for our young people and for adults as well, is to find out early, listen to people, listen to what they say. Teachers, we need to do our best to hear the kids we're working with and understand what makes them tick, so that we can really be there and address anything that's difficult for them, to make those tweaks in how we teach. And I think being open, breaking barriers down, is about being open. It's why I talk a lot about what's easy, what's wobbly. It's why I'm on the committee, on the trustees of the BDA. It's why I do anything, is to be open about what makes my life tricky, but then how to make it easier. And let yourself feel stuff. Anyone who knows me knows when I'm happy, I'm cracking, because I feel stuff big. And I think a lot of dyslexic people do feel stuff big. So if I'm irritatingly perky, but if something knocks me, it hurts my soul. And I'm quite open about that. It's no secret. And let things through, feel stuff, communicate it, and give people time and space to have those moments, I would say. And that should hopefully lead to kids and young people, or to people who are new to their journey with dyslexia, seeing what's possible and seeing how other people go on in their journey with dyslexia. My husband always says there's a notion of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. He's not wrong, I think. I'm not going to tell him that. He's not wrong. I can see him. I'm in my garden. He's over in the kitchen. I'm not going to tell him that. but actually he's right. You know, and I think we need to broaden our definition of success. For me, it's, am I happy? Am I sustainable? Is my life sustainable? Can I do useful stuff? If that's the case, I'm successful, and that actually helps me feel happy. And I remind myself of that when I'm having a moment. And it is about smashing through what's preconceived as successful. That's a huge problem, a huge discussion, a huge cultural, classy, kind of historically quite limited way of looking at success. But I'm on it. I'm doing what I can, as are many people. And I think ultimately, let's catch up structures in education up to the 21st century around tech, around exams, so that those things are matching where we are nowadays. And I think I've seen there's about 5 minutes or so left. That's me done talking. So it might be that there's questions, it might be that there's not questions, but that's me. Has anyone got anything?
Thanks, Helen. And you know, I know it's difficult sort of sharing your lived experiences, and can be very emotional, can't it? Doing that. So thank you so much for sharing those things. Okay. And you know, to have your perspective on this as a very personal perspective is really interesting. So if anyone's got any questions, we have got a little bit of time before we break for lunch. And if anyone's got on late and is wondering why Helen is wearing a red t-shirt and I'm wearing a red t-shirt, we're going red for dyslexia, and today is supported by Succeed with Dyslexia, and we also have Donna from Succeed with Dyslexia who's off camera at the moment, and because she's got COVID, but you know, so yeah, so that's why Donna's being quiet. But yeah, so we're all not as, we haven't done as much as the as Sarah, who dyed her hair red, but I thought that was amazing.
I've only ever had red hair hair that red by accident. It was not no, it did not work with me. My school shirt was this colour, and I went to school with hair that colour, and I got so told off in year 10. It did not go down well.
So, I mean, as we were saying, you're a trustee of BDA. Perhaps you'd just like to share what the BDA are doing for Dyslexia Awareness Week as well.
It's not that I won't share. I haven't got my. It's around hidden stuff, I think. Do you know what? I can't remember. Well,
it's around. No, hidden was last year. It's around what we're doing the theme on today, which is breaking down barriers. I know they have got some free training that you can access. So do go on their website, bdadyslexia.org.uk, and there's further information on there.
I know we've got lots going on in Wiltshire with it as well. Yes. I'm based down in Vegas, so Trowbridge. Yes. We've got events on at the town hall, and I think it's being recorded where we can as well. But unless I know I have to answer a question on something, I'm like, no, it's all right. You put me on the spot, Katrina.
Sorry.
You just put me on the spot.
No. Number one rule not to do as a teacher.
I don't care. It's really not a problem. But I have a goldfish brain. I have nothing stored in here that I don't need in the next 3 minutes.
Well, we did have a question from Sally, but it was more about the difference between someone who isn't, who isn't achieving. How do we know the difference between someone who isn't achieving and someone who's got special needs? I don't know if...
With my Senko hat on, I can very easily
engage
with that.
Please do.
I think there's I've been a Senko, so there's lots and lots of ways to do it. Talk to the child. Talk to the family, because that before one needs to go off and kind of get cross with a student or that, question family situations in a negative way, get that holistic picture of what's going on. Has the child always not progressed, or is it all of a sudden? It's so rare that a kid doesn't make progress across the board. Like, that's so rare. So there's going to be some sort of dips and spikinesses, even if it's minute. You can always use P levels or kind of little. There's various different academy trusts. I know Oasis Academy Trust have got some of the most. I worked with them for a while. Have some of the most wonderful primary school little progress trackers. So look at progress trackers. There will be patterns. You might feel like you're splitting hairs, but it will be worth it. do a dyslexia screener. You know, there are some nice quality ones. We at Stonehenge, where I last worked, we used the GL screener. It was an okay snapshot, and you've kind of got, so if you've got a screener, if you've got reading test outcomes, if you've got CAT scores, or you know, whatever pieces of data, use them to kind of in collaboration with all your qualitative observational stuff to look at what's going on. Is there any progress that a child is making? You've done, and everything where the student's progress is monitored, and try and build up that picture. If you're not sure what dyslexia is, you know, your MAT or your local authority will probably have a phone number or an email address you can talk to somebody who's got the training in that area. Local Senko networks, the ones in Wiltshire, are brilliant. So it's about a holistic picture, because there will always be a reason. I've just seen Susie's posted something.
Yeah.
I can't read and talk, but I think for me it's about the holistic picture.
Yeah.
And
So Susie's saying that she trained with you at Bath Spa, was always in awe of how accomplished you are. It just goes to show how we tend to judge things through the lens of our own insecurities. Thanks for being gobby and sharing. It empowers us all to speak up for ourselves. Yes, thank you, Susie. So Susie's also involved with BDA, aren't you?
Yes, Susie's awesome.
So, yes. Yes, I mean, and the other thing to perhaps talk about is in Wiltshire, you're very much involved with the quality mark, aren't you? That the BDA.
Oh, yeah, I am. Turns out I'm evaluating it. I keep forgetting. We've got, like, we're really lucky in Wiltshire. Caroline Folk, who is like, she just runs Wiltshire Dyslexia basically from the volunteer perspective.
Yeah.
She's epic, and I turn up to meetings and just let her. I do as I'm told, which is a feat in itself. But we were in a meeting, I was with my little boy, so it must have been a couple of years ago, just before COVID, and we were talking about potentially running this dyslexia friendly schools thing, and they were like, "Oh, Helen, could you evaluate it?" I was like, "Yeah, if you want." Yeah, well, like, no, kind of flippantly, I could, yes, if you would like me to. And then I ended up doing a sort of baseline evaluation report for them, and it was such a privilege to have such amazing rich data from the school's perspective. So schools are now, and Alison Shaloi on their SENS team she's like in charge. She's again amazing.
Yeah.
She is sort of liaising very closely with the schools. A lot of them are now meeting the BDA, the quality mark standards. They're submitting the relevant bits of paper to it, and I think probably towards or after Christmas I'll start crunching numbers and doing the rest of it. So I'm very lucky, but it's very cool.
So if anyone's interested in the quality mark, there's lots of information on the BDA website. The other thing is you talk about Caroline Folk. She does a wonderful newsletter. If anyone's interested in that, let me know, and I can put you on the mailing list or forward the one that I get. It's amazing newsletter with lots of fantastic information in it.
She's proper good, is Caroline.
Excellent. And so Sally's saying thank you for that. A Senko in our local group had asked for something to give to parents. Thank you for being so open and honest this morning, Helen. And another comment, I'm gobby too, and now going on to my master's in my 50s after getting a degree this year. Being passionate is the best. Completely agree. So
absolutely.
And so Caroline's newsletter, Susie's asked for that. Would you be able to put the link on the chat box for that, Helen? I've got my own copy.
Link. She emails it out. Susie, if you have still got my phone number from our course, ping me a message. If not, I'm on Twitter at Dr Helen Ross, or my email is helen@helensplace.co.uk. Anyone is free to just bombard me. It's all good.
So
it's all
thank
good
you so much.
It was really good, Helen. So
really good. So fantastic. We've had a fantastic morning so far, and we're going to stop for lunch, and we're going to be back this afternoon with Amy starting after lunch. That's going to be at 1:30, so we'll stop till 1:30, and we've got a fantastic afternoon planned.